Okay, Erev Tov, Shalom Aleichem, everyone, as we're continuing in Hilchot Netilat Yadayim, and we're today in the Tzurba, we're in Halacha, we're in Shir 5, and Hilchot Netilat Yadayim, let's do the part 4 in the Tzurba, I think for us it's already part 6, so let's take a look. So up until now, past 5 Shirim we've been dealing with the Netilat Yadayim, that we wash our hands, page 179 in volume 13 of the Tzurba. We've been dealing with washing our hands for Netilat Yadayim for bread, for a Suda. We're starting a Suda and we wash our hands for bread, and we learned, to sum up, there's really 2 reasons why we wash our hands for bread, right? We know that the Chacham made it a gezerah that there's Tomei on our hands, that there's Tumah on our hands. And since the Kahanim are not allowed to eat Truma when they're Tomei, so they have to wash their hands. But in order to for the Kahanim to have the gezerah, they made the gezerah all of Klal Yisrael. So, right, so no one forgets. So therefore, all of Klal Yisrael, even though we don't eat Truma, everyone now has to wash their hands. This is what's known as Srach Truma. This is the one reason for washing our hands on Netilat Yadayim before we eat bread. Another reason was that we're to make ourselves like holy. The pasuk says you should be holy, and it says like Netilat Yadayim that they would do in the Beit HaMikdash before they went in to eat the kachim, eat the different stuff there. They would have to wash and stuff like that. So that's another example. That's another reason why we wash our hands for bread. Now we're going to come into another idea, something that's dipped into liquid. So this everybody knows. Famously, we all know from Pesach night, right? So we have Kadesh, Urchatz, and then Karpas, right? So what do you do in Urchatz? Everybody knows you wash your hands without a bracha. Why are we washing our hands at that point? Nothing better to do. No, because we're about to take a vegetable and dip it into a liquid, so we wash our hands. So let's go and start with this. Starting Masechet Pesachim, source number 1, the Shir, page 179. Amar Rabbi Elazar, Amar Rabbi Oshia. So Elazar says, Rabbi Oshia said, Kol shetubulu b'mashke, anything that you dip into liquid, anything. Okay, this includes whether it be crackers that you're putting into a tea. We'll have to see if that's still applicable today, but it means anything that you dip into a liquid. Tzarech, cookies and milk, right? Tzarech netilat yadayim, requires netilat yadayim. This is a Gemara. It's Beferish Gemara, Masechet Pesachim. In the last parak over there, in the 10th parak, it says you have to wash your hands if you're dipping something into a liquid. Now, which liquid? Okay, anyone who knows these halachas will say it's the 7 liquids, right? That's, by the way, that's the Rambam's approach, and that's the halacha. We go with the Rambam, the 7 liquids. What the 7 liquids are, we'll mention in a moment. But there are 7 specific liquids that those are the 7 liquids. According to the Ravad, he says any liquid could become impure, not just 7 liquids. Any liquid whatsoever. According to the Ravad, any liquid you put it into could become a tameh, and therefore you would have to wash your hands for any of them. But halacha, we're going to see it's like the Rambam. It's the Yad Shachadam. That's the 7 liquids. I'll go through them Bez Hashem shortly. So 7 liquids. Then if you're going to dip into, so the Rambam is learning that Gemara, you would have to wash your hands beforehand. Now, Rashi there on that Gemara, the Tzurba doesn't bring it down. But Rashi there in the Gemara, the way the Achronim learn Rashi, it's because it's like Truma, so it's like bread. Meaning the whole reason why we wash on bread, because of Truma, it's the same reason why you have to wash your hands there. But Tosafot takes a whole different approach. And here, this is what the Tzurba brings in over here in source number 2. Benira, and it appears to me, the Netil Dahacha, Loimishum Kedusha V'Nikiyas Kamo B'Naha. It's not like bread. Tosafot says the washing for vegetables or anything they're dipping into liquid is not it's not like bread at all. Rashi says it is like bread. Rashi there says it's like bread. So it's like washing what we do for bread. But Tosafot says it's not. The reason why we wash, he says there's going to be a problem. You know, there's a din, a special din, special halacha when it comes to liquid. when it comes, without getting too technical in Tumah v'Tahara, but in Tumah you have levels. You have an Ava Tumah, a Rishon Tumah, Sheni L'Tumah. Every time a Tameh touches another thing, it decreases in its level of Tumah. However, when it comes to liquid, the Chachamim made a Gzera that it goes the other way. So if a Sheni touches a liquid, it becomes a Rishon. If a Shlishi touches it, goes back. It always goes up a level when it comes to there. So he says, therefore, liquid should not become a first degree. You don't want to, if you have let's say, let's use karpas as our example. So what does most people use for karpas? So you have celery. If you have a piece of celery, your hand's a second degree of tumah, and you're going to go and touch the liquid, and now your hand touches the liquid, that liquid now becomes a rishon l'tumah. And you're not allowed to eat rishon l'tumah. According to Tosfot, you're not allowed to eat tumah. Although today we eat only tumah. There's nothing that's tar today. Everything we eat is tumah. So this is what Tosfot says. Anon she'ena anu nizharin miltumot atzmenu umulchol ochlin tam'in ve'ein anu tzrichin la'oto netila. So Tosfot comes and says it's not related to washing your hand for Netilat Yadayim. It's because of Tumah v'Tahara, and you shouldn't eat tummy things back in the day of the Talmud, back in the days of the Mikdash. But today we do eat tummy things because we know way to be tar. So therefore, there's no reason to wash your hands. There's no law to wash your hands when you're eating a vegetable or anything that's going to be dipped into liquid. That is Tosfot's approach. Tosfot's approach is it's not related to washing your hands for bread. And since it's only related to Tumah v'Tahara, it's only related to Tumah v'Tahara. And therefore, we don't have Tumah v'Tahara today. You do not have to wash your hands before dipping something into a liquid. That
or whatever we're eating is wet.
Dipping it into a liquid, and if it remains wet after it got wet, yes, even if it remained wet after it got wet, we'll deal with that. Okay, so now let's see another Rishon. Okay, so I told you. So according to the Levush, we're going to get into that. It's a holiday, so we'll do extra days, or the children should ask. But according to Rashi, the Rambam, and the Rush, this is the way they learn. So we're going to learn from the Rush. Amar Be'elazar, Amar Be'oishia, Kol she'tibulu b'mashke, tzarech netilat yadayim, lefisha mishaka alul lekabel tuma, hitzrichu kanetila mishum srach truma. So the last three words, mishum srach truma. It's the same reason why we wash our hands for bread, because it's related to truma. And truma kahanim couldn't eat until they washed their hands, so they made the gzeira and everything, including this. This is part of the gzeira. So the reason, according to these Rishonim, which is Rashi, Rambam, Rosh, these are the least three that I know of, that say that it's because of Srach Truma, means it's because of washing your hands for bread. So it's parallel to washing your hands for bread. And since we wash our hands for bread today, we should still need to wash our hands before dipping something into a liquid or eating something that is wet after it's been dipped in. Okay, so let's now take a look at the Beit Yosef. So this is Rav Yosef Karo, source number 4. So he brings from the Maharam of Rothenburg, Ketav, Ha'idna, Ein Tzarech Netila L'Davar Shetibul Mashka, V'al Kein Lo Yeh Mevarech Al Netila Shel Tibul Rishon. He says today it's not needed to wash your hands when you're dipping something into a liquid. Therefore, when we do wash on Pesach, we don't say a bracha. Okay, so it comes out as follows right now. We have a Tosafot, we have the Maram and Rothenburg that says you don't have to wash today. Pesach, for some reason, they're washing, and they're not washing with the bracha. We have the Rush, the Rambam, the Rashi, who said you have to wash. Seemingly, it's similar to bread. You should say a bracha. What does the Shulchan Aruch do? So, Shulchan Aruch, source number 5. Im ochel davar shetibulo be'echa mishiva mashkin. If you would eat food that was dipped into one of the 7 liquids, what are the 7 liquids? Okay, so let the Shulchan Aruch tell us. Yad shochet dam, the hainu, which are yayin, it's wine, devash, honey, shemen, oil, milk, tal is dew, dam is blood, and mayim. These are the 7 liquids that could become tummy. Okay, you can make something tummy, it can become tummy. These are the 7 liquids. Usually, dvash in the Torah is what's it? Date honey, right?
Not be honey.
Usually not bee honey. I'm not sure how it applies in the halacha over here. If it's any honey, usually in the Torah when we say dvash, we mean date honey, not bee honey. Okay, so I don't know. We have to look that up. Okay, so it continues. Veloy nitnagev, and it didn't dry. So you dip something into a liquid, and it's not dry yet. And even if you're not touching the wet place, right? So let's say I have this big long celery stick, right? And I dip it inside the liquid, but it's only going halfway. So this part's still not in the liquid. It's not wet. Still, he says, Sarach netila, you must wash below bracha, without a bracha. Okay, Shulchan Aruch takes a compromise approach. Okay, he says there are some Rishonim, right? You have Tosot, Maram Rotzenberg, who says you don't have to wash at all. And you have some Rishonim who say you have to wash with the bracha. Rashi, Rambam, Rush. So he says, we'll take a compromise, half. You must wash, but no bracha. Says the Ramah. The Ramah does not argue. The Ramah, who most Ashkenazim go with, are not arguing. He's not arguing the Shulchan Aruch. He adds on even more. He says, even if you dip just the head of the vegetable, right, you should still wash your hands without a bracha. So the Ramah is not arguing with the Shulchan Aruch. Seems to be, right now, you would assume that all Sfardim and Ashkenazim would hold the same. The Ramah and the Shulchan Aruch hold. You wash without a bracha. Before we move on, I'm just going to look at the Yalkut Yosef English edition. If you have it, I brought it over here on the table. If you have it, I would ask you to turn to page 105. And just to see for us, Sfardi Psak from Chamavadia and his children, what do they say over here? So he says, although the halacha follows those who rule that you must wash, we refrain from reciting the bracha because of safek brachot lehakel. Therefore, Shulchan Aruch says you must wash, but you don't make the bracha. He says you have to wash just like you would wash for bread. Same dinim for the water, the keli, everything has to be the exact same. He says as follows, number halacha 35. It's important to publicize the halacha that after rinsing fruits or vegetables in water, it is necessary to perform Netilat Yadayim before eating them. Although the intention was just to remove any dirt, the fruit is still considered a moistened food, and you must wash your hands beforehand. So sometimes people take a pepper or whatever it is, and they run it under the sink, right? Once the food gets wet, that's it.
Usually what we do, we wipe it, then we eat it.
Okay, if you wipe it, that's okay, because now it's not wet anymore, right? But if the food is wet, you're going to have to wash your hands. Okay, halacha 36 in the Yalkut Yosef. Let's take a look. It is necessary to wash hands only if the food is still moist when one eats it. If it is dry or the water was wiped off, you no longer have to wash your hands. If the food is only slightly moist, but after touching it, one's fingers become wet enough to moisten yet another surface. So you touch the dust, and then you touch something else with your hand, and it makes it wet. Then you have to still wash your hands for it. If it's only that you touch it, it feels wet, but your hands doesn't become wet enough to make something else wet, then you do not have to make Netilat Yadayim. Okay, 37. He says when planning to eat a moistened food, you have to wash, even if you're not planning to touch the part that's not going in, right? Just like the Shulchan Aruch said, just like Shulchan Aruch said, just like the Ramah said, he still must perform Netilat Yadayim because it might be that he will come to touch it. He adds on, if someone is using a fork or a spoon and doesn't touch the food at all, he still needs to wash his hands Netilat Yadayim.
This is talking about in case if we didn't wash until then for hamut.
Right.
No,
And this is not during the Suda. Okay, if you wash for the Suda, your hands are already washed. You already said a bracha. You're good. Yeah, you can do anything you want during the Suda. We're talking, you're not eating bread. Your wife wants you to eat healthy. So she made for you a vegetable tray with healthy dressing over there. No sugar, nothing added. No oil, no sugar. Very healthy. Everything's healthy. Now, the vegetables are still moist. In such a case, you're going to have to wash your hands until the Yadayim before you start eating those vegetables. Or if she gave you a dressing that's wet, it's a liquid, and you're going to put your vegetables in that liquid, you're going to have to wash your hands beforehand until the Yadayim. Say again?
Not one of the 7 liquids.
So you have to see the composition of the dressing. If it's mostly water, it's a different thing. If it's mostly, depending, a lot of the imitation vinegars, right? A lot of the imitation vinegars that they sell, especially like the Pesach vinegars, are mostly water, like a little percentage of some acid in there. So those are going to be considered water, right? You have to know what you're eating. Okay. Anyway, that is the halachot from the Yalkut Yosef. Let's continue in the Tzurba on page 181 with the Mishnah Brura. The Mishnah Brura says, what does it mean, something that you dip into a liquid? Those who soak fruits or vegetables in order to clean them are considered dipping them in a liquid. Now he gives a certain leniency. An item that is not normally dipped or does not normally have liquid on it does not need Netilat Yadayim. It's uncommon, and Chum didn't put a gzeira on it. So, which vegetable is uncommon to wash? I'm not sure, but let's say there was something or anything. Let's say a piece of cake, right? Most people don't put a piece of cake into water, and they don't dip it into milk, right? So even if you were going to dip the piece of cake into a milk, you don't wash your hands for it. Now, cookies into milk is different. People do dip cookies into milk. Well, let's say I had cake, and no one dips cake into milk, and I'm dipping cake into milk. So Mishnah Brura says you don't have to wash your hands for that. So too, he says, one who dips his finger in a liquid and he sucks on it. So he has a soda, right? He has let's say he has like orange juice is 99% water, so it's water. Halachically, it's water. So or he has a tea, it's water, right? He wants to dip his finger and put it down in his mouth. Does he have to wash his hands beforehand? Mishnah Brura says no, because there was no gzeira on drinking. You're drinking now. You're not dipping a food into a liquid. So similarly, in the Yalkut Yosef, take a look on page 116, 52. He says over there that it's not necessary to perform a Netilat Yadayim on your hands in order to drink a beverage. Chacham only instituted the mitzvah for ways that it's really done when you put something in something. You dip a food into something. If you stop drinking, you don't have to. You're licking your finger, and Mishnah Brura says you don't have to. Okay, so far the Mishnah Brura gave us two leniencies. If it's a food that's not usually dipped into liquid, and if you are drinking or dipping your fingers into something, again, not the derech, that is going to be a leniency. You don't have to wash your hands. Okay. So we've seen the Machloket Rishonim. We see what the Shulchan Aruch says. Seems to be the Mishnah Brura is agreeing with the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah. He's just adding leniencies, but he's not saying you do not have to wash. So we have Rashi, Rambam, Rosh. That's our Rishonim. Shulchan Aruch, Ramah, Mishnah Brura, right? All saying the same thing. Before you eat something that you dip into a liquid, you're going to have to wash. So you look around today and you'll see that most people are not washing, right? Most people are not washing when they're dipping something into liquid. Let's see where this comes from. Now, for Sfaradim, for us who follow Chamuladia, for us who follow Shulchan Aruch, we're going to have to wash. That's the halacha. L'maisa, they hold we have to wash, we have to wash. What about some Ashkenazim? What is their leniency? So let's take a look. So he starts here in the Tzurba. He starts with Pesach night. You wash your hands to urchatz, you don't make a bracha, right? You're about to dip karpas into salt water. Says the Taz, the Taz's yurtzeit actually was last week. I think it was either Thursday or Wednesday or Thursday, something like that. The Taz's yurtzeit. Okay, Taz was Rav David Segel, right? He's a big Lamdan, huge man. What does he say? He says, the kol Anything you put into a liquid, you have to wash. It's a big tochacha, big rebuke that's open to those. He says, this is a big rebuke. You wash on Pesach night, and you don't wash the rest of the year. Chutzpah. You have to wash the rest of the year. That's what the Taz says. Taz is talking to his own people, saying to Ashkenazim, saying you have to wash your hands. Those of you who don't, Pesach night he says, the man nishtana halayla hazeh mikol yomim shebeshana. What's the difference Pesach night from all the nights of the year? Why are you washing tonight and not the rest of the year? That's what the Taz. Okay.
That's the wash with the book 3 and 3, right? But accidentally you wash every other one. You have to wipe it, then you wash it again.
Technically, what's going on when you're washing back and forth? Why are we washing more than once? Why are we washing twice? Really, all you need is reveat water on your hand, right? So as long as you got reveat water in your hand. The whole point of washing twice is that if it came tamei and you touch something, so you do it twice so it can't become tamei, because the water trickled down and came back up, it'll make everything tamei. That's why you wash twice. So as long as nothing happened, you washed again and again, I would assume it's okay. It's not the proper procedure, but you had enough water on your hands. Okay, now that's the Taz. Taz seems to be quite upset with the people who do not wash their hands for dipping food into liquid throughout the year. Comes the Levush, and the Levush, Nar Chaim, Taf Ein Gimel. He says as follows: even though people are not careful the rest of the year, maybe because there's chibat, there's chiba, there's love for the holiday. And it's a dipping of a mitzvah. Therefore, we're going to be more pure when it comes to that. So the Levush takes a drastically different approach than the Taz. Taz says, chutzpah, you're not washing your hands the rest of the year. And the Levush says, no. We don't have to wash our hands the rest of the year. Pesach by night is a special night. We love it more. It's more of a reason to be more tahar. So we're going to wash our hands special for Pesach at night. But there's no din to wash it. Like the Tosfot, like the Maram Rotenberg, there's no din to wash. Okay, and here he brings in the note 5, he brings the Netziv suggests that in the Seder night, we model the practice in the Beit HaMikdash. And in the Beit HaMikdash, they were careful with Tumah B'Tahara. So that's why we do that. The Chok Yaakov writes, so the children will ask, right? If she wants children to see stuff, so that's why we do it. Even though there's no halacha to do it, we do it so people will ask. The children will ask. And so there's different reasons why they'll say there's really no halacha, but we just do it either because it's special, either because it's like the Beit HaMikdash, either because we want children to ask. Magin Avram, Katav Halechem Chamudot, Ha'olam Nohagim Shalolito. The world does not wash their hands before dipping something into a liquid. Yeshlham al Misha Yismuchu, they have what to rely on. Shatos Sarvim Khan, because Tosfot, a big Rishon, holds this way. Upuk Chazei Mai Alma Dover. Go and see what people do. Go see what the nation does. Sometimes you're not sure what the halacha is. We say, go see what everyone's doing. So you're not sure what to do. Wash your hands. Go wash your hands. Look around. People are not. So we have the Levush, Magen Avram, right? Those are our sources who say you don't have to wash. Right? Those are our Achronim who say you don't have to wash. Let's see Mishnah Brura. Mishnah Brura. Here in our Siman in Shulchan Aruch. Not beat down. Okay, that's okay. It's a better view when it's more forward. Okay. He says, "Ki yesh miktsas rishonim the savish lo hitzichu chacham et gesadam davar shektivolo b'mashka evei meim she'oichem mitharim mashein kin achshav shekulanu tamei meitim lekach leivachan tibdaim shesefer brachat lahak." He says there are some rishonim who say you don't have to wash your hands today because the whole point of washing your hands was because of tumah v'tahara, and today we don't have that. And Magen Avram, at the top of page 184, Hevi b'shem alechem chamudos ha'oil noigim shlalito v'yeshel mash yismuchu hanyo miktsas harishonim. But he says, Mishnah Brura, and this is the bolded part, page 184 on the top. Aval harba achronim hechmiru me'oid bedavar v'katvu de'ikar kareiva paiskim the tzarech etil medina Af Bisman Hazeh. So the Mishnah Berurah says, although you have these Achronim, and although you have these Rishonim, the Ikar Hadin is that you do have to wash your hands before you dip something into a liquid. So those Ashkenazim who say they follow the Mishnah Berurah would have to be washing their hands before they dip something into a liquid, according to the Mishnah Berurah. You're sinning. You're not doing the right thing. Well, if you don't daven shachar, what's going to happen? The lightning's going to come. Same thing. Same thing. Same thing. Yes, Malkiel.
When it says washing hands with a cup 3 times, like for bread, or it could
Exactly
be
like for bread.
way.
Exactly like for bread. Exactly like for bread.
Okay.
Exactly like for bread. We're going to see for cookies, they're not going to have to do it. We're going to see for it depends. I'm going to tell you. This guy's telling me how to do it. And I'm going to show you how Chacham Ovadia says you can get out without washing it. If you have the right qualification, you're not going to have to do it. You're going to see. Just let.
He just did it himself also. I told him and he saw this. Just listen to this.
Can we continue the share, or you want to give the share? Well, you might have a new market share soon. All right. Says the Yalkut Yosef, if you're eating a food that has moisture on it, not during a meal, or mishar mashkin soinin, or anything else that's cold on it, yayin davash devarim. Oh, so he says over here, devurim, davash devurim. He says it's bee honey, and not date honey. Here the Yalkut Yosef, it's bee honey. So you had the question what honey it is, so it's bee honey. But he says. Yain, Dvash, Devurim, Shem and Zayit, Olive, Tal, and Dum. And when it's not dried, it's wet in order to make something else wet. What does he say? You have to wash your hands without a bracha. And you have to wash your hands exactly like Netilat Yadayim. Okay? So that's what the Yalkut Yosef says. Very, very simple. He says the halacha is you have to wash, and we cleared that it's bee honey. You have to wash. Anything that's being wet, anything that's dipped into liquid, you have to wash. So much so, let's take a look at the Gra, right? Rav Eliyahu of Vilna. I will not do this inside. There's the purple box over, the pink purple box. A little biography sketch of the Vilna Gaon. You have a minute or two to read it on your own. I would suggest you to read it. Amazing facts about the Vilna Gaon. But let's see what the Vilna Gaon says in his Bir HaGra. He says, "Bli bracha, right? Shulchan Aruch said, don't say a bracha. Tosfot sham desvirle ha'idna ein tzarich netila." He says the reason why the Shulchan Aruch says don't say the bracha is because the Shulchan Aruch is taking into account Tosfot's opinion that today it doesn't apply. Of al kol ha'gaonim, but he says the Gra, all the gaonim, v'rov poskim, and the majority of the poskim hiskimu shikam ha'idna nohe kimo pat b'tzarich bracha, that everyone today holds it's just like bread and it needs bracha v'chein ikar. That's the halacha. According to the Vilna Gaon, not only you have to wash like you wash for bread, you have to say the bracha on it. On the Netilat today. Before dipping into a liquid, according to the Gaon, you would have to say a bracha. Now, it's not surprising. The Gaon also says when you wash your hands before davening, which is a halacha, you have to wash your hands before davening. The Gaon also says you have to say bracha there too. We don't do that, and we don't do that. But the Gaon was very makbid. Here he says you have to wash with a bracha. So he would wash the bracha on the Seder night for sure, according to the Vilna Gaon. Shulchan Aruch HaMekutzar. This is one of the Shulchan Aruchs that for the Yemenite Jews, and he writes over here, V'gam kein mevarach anatiyat l'dayim nefi minhag baladi. According to the certain Yemenites, the baladi minhagim, they wash like for bread, and they say a bracha. Now the other Temanim, known as the Shammai custom, they wash without a bracha like Sfaradim. But here he shows you that there are opinions that you wash with a bracha. So you have a very, very wide spectrum here of halacha. You have the Temanim and the Gaon that says you wash with a bracha. You have the Shulchan Aruch. You have the Shulchan Aruch and the Mishnah Brura, the Ramah, that say you wash without a bracha. And then you have the Lavush, Morgan Avram, and others who say you don't have to wash at all, right? Tosfos being its main source. Okay. As we turn the page to 186, he brings the Aruch HaShulchan. He writes as well. He writes as well that there's many opinions on this, and he writes in the end, since Tosfot and since the reasons and whatever, basically we're lenient about it nowadays. The Aruch HaShulchan, another Achron, who is lenient about it. So we come as follows. Take a look at page 187, a beautiful summary of everything we did up until now. We started with the Gemara in Psachim. The Gemara in Psachim said anything you dip into a liquid means Netilat Yadayim. We had Tosfot's opinion that said the whole reason was because of Tumah B'Tahara. Tumah B'Tahara is not applicable today, so you do not have to wash your hands anymore. Rosh said no. It's an extension of washing your hands for bread. That was Rashi, Rambam, right? So you have to wash still today. Since if you go with Tosfot, you don't have to wash today. You go with Rashi, Rosh, Rambam, you will have to wash today. Shulchan Aruch says wash without a bracha because we have to take Tosfos' opinion into account. Magen Avram says we don't wash today. We don't make a bracha. We don't wash nothing. That's the Lavush and that's others Aruch HaShulchan. Then you have the Mishnah Brura and Yalkut Yosef, the Ramah, you wash without a bracha. And then you have the Vilna Gaon and the Shulchan Aruch HaMekutzar, the Temanim, who say you wash with a bracha. All right, that is the summary of where we're up to right now. Okay, now before we move on into further halachot in this, one of the 7 liquids was dam, blood. Which blood are we talking about? When can you ever eat blood? You're not allowed to eat blood. So when do you have the ability to dip something into blood and then you have to wash your hands for that? Right? That's one of the 7 liquids. Okay. So he says, the Magen Avram, this is mentioned just because it's mentioned. Because usually when you mention 7 liquids, blood is one of those liquids, so we mention it. He says, and don't tell me it's fish blood that you're allowed to drink, or grasshopper blood, that kosher grasshoppers you're allowed to drink its blood. Those are not considered blood to make something come in. It has to be animal blood. And animal blood is usher. Says the Mishnah Brura, you had a doctor who said you have to eat something dipped into blood, otherwise you're going to die. So then, for medicinal purposes, you're allowed to eat it. If you're allowed to eat it, now you have to wash your hands for it. All right, so if you have a heter to eat an isser, then you will have to wash your hands for it. Okay, but he brings a hard tzvi here. Hard tzvi just goes back and forth on something. You can go through it if you want, but halacha ma'aseh doesn't change. Well, you're not saying a bracha when you're washing it. Eat isser, you say a bracha, right? I don't know. Do you? Right. Usually don't. No. Usually when you're eating isser, you don't. Usually you don't. So if you take a look at the Yalkut Yosef, page 113, he says the same thing. He says the same thing. The term blood listed among the 7 beverages refers of someone who must eat food dipped into animal blood as treatment for a dangerous illness. Otherwise, it's forbidden to eat any mammal or fowl, any bird's blood or any animal blood. The blood of fish or kosher grasshoppers is always permissible, and it's not considered one of the 7 liquids. Therefore, if someone eats a fish with its blood, he does not have to wash his hands. Netilat Yadayim. Okay, so that's the case of blood for refuah. All right. Now, we saw that the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah said, even if the food is not touching the liquid, you still have to wash your hands, right? Because you might come to wash it. Let's see if there's any kulas, any leniencies about this. Let's take a look. Mishnah Brura. Mishnah Brura, source number 19 on page 190. V'achronim, Iskimu. The mini tavshel kivan she'ein derech ligo bo biyad, elocha b'kaf, einu tzarech netilat yadayim. Let's say you have a wet food, right? But you don't eat it with your hands. You eat it only with a spoon, only with a fork. What's an example here? Vegetable soup. This is why this is the leniency. This is the kula. This is the kula. This is where it comes from. Let's say you have vegetable soup. So you have vegetables that are wet, but you don't have to wash before you eat vegetable soup. Why? Because how do you eat vegetable soup? You eat it with a spoon. You're dipping now matzah, or you're eating the matzah cracked. So then you're eating it with the spoon. That's what he says. You're eating it with the spoon. You know, according to Mishnah Berurah, you don't have to wash. Even if you accidentally touch it while eating with the spoon, it's fine. But if he suddenly wants to eat his celery stalk that he's going to dip into a liquid, he wants to eat that with a fork, that won't help. So the Mishnah Berurah gives another leniency. The leniency is, how do you usually eat that food? If you usually eat that food with a utensil, you will not have to wash your hands. Okay? So maybe, think about it. You know, vegetable sticks, when they cut the vegetables into sticks, you usually use your hand to eat it. But if they cut the vegetable fine, how do you eat it now? You can't eat it with your fingers. You're eating it with a spoon or a fork. So in such a case, even if it's wet, you don't have to wash your hands if you're eating it with a fork or a spoon, because you're eating a cut up, fine cut, very thinly, a very small cut up salad. You can't eat it with your hands. That's what the Mishnah Berurah's kula is. Says the Yalkut Yosef. Over here he brings from the Yalkut Yosef. One who eats vegetable soup or rice or other cooked dishes that contain moisture, they have sauce, right? Other things with the spoon or a fork. He says, you do not have to wash your hands due to being a food dipped in liquid, as this is an accepted custom because people usually eat them with a spoon or a fork. Okay, so that's a kula. That is a kula. If you usually eat the food with the utensil, you don't have to wash your hands. What do you mean? After what? Oh, he just says, and I already said that. Anything one usually eats by hand. If you have a vegetable that's a stick, celery stick, and now you want to eat that celery stick with a fork, you'll still have to wash your hands, because usually when they have the vegetables cut up, you usually use your hand. So you'll still have to wash. All right. He brings right. So that's not a problem. Not a problem. It has to be the 7 liquids, but its own water.
Tomato is wet, it's a problem. But if
it's a tomato juice from the tomato itself, it's not a problem. If you dip tomatoes into tomato juice, still not a problem. It's when you dip it into one of the 7 liquids, or it touches one of the 7 liquids. Okay. Now why? Why, if he's eating now with a fork, he has the celery stick and he's eating the celery stick with a fork, why make him wash? He's eating with the fork. So Mishnah Berurah says, because maybe he'll come to touch it. Maybe he'll come to touch it. Says the Piskei Teshuvot, if people do not usually dip the entire thing, such as when dipping mizonot. Let's say you're dipping mizonot into the soup or into a drink. Okay, so you have your tea biscuits, you're having your cookie, and you want to dip it in to your tea. Okay, where he says, where one is careful that his fingers do not touch the liquid, according to the Piskei Teshuvot, it's like he's eating with a spoon. He does not need Netilat Yadayim. So according to the Piskei Teshuvot, he's not touching it. Usually when you have hot boiling tea and you're putting your tea biscuit inside, you're not touching the hot water.
Sometimes biscuit get melted and
then you leave it inside. You're not taking it out afterwards. Anyway, the Piskei Teshuvot says, if you're holding the tea biscuit, right, here's my tea biscuit, and I'm putting it into my tea, and I'm only putting it halfway in. My hand is still out,
Before we still you have to wash.
but that's when it wasn't mizonot. This is when it's mizonot. Because when it's mizonot and you're putting it in and you're being careful, because usually people don't dip mizonot into a liquid. It's not very usual. People do most times you eat cookies. Are you dipping it into milk? No. Most times you eat timbits. Are you dipping it into milk? No. Most people are not doing that. Sometimes you get into the habit. It's the dried out bread. Suchariki, yeah. The toast. Oh, if that's the way you're always going to eat it, then it's going to be a problem. Then it's going to be a problem. Then you're going to have to wash. Because he's saying here when it's not the derech. Im ein regulot hanashim klal lahativul kolo. It's not the minute to dip it all in. He's saying when it's not the minute to dip it all in. When you do the sachariki, you're putting the whole thing in or only half of it? Half at a time, or you put the whole thing in? Okay, this is the Piskei Tshuva. What about us? What about us? The Ben Ish Chai and the Al Kuchose. Oh, that's definitely hamotzi, no? It's bread. You're already washing for. That's you say a pata bobby kisonin. It's now crunchy. Okay, maybe I don't know. I don't want to get into that. Right now. We'll have to check that out. I have to check it out. It's. We have to get into. I don't want to get. A pata bobby kisonin comes in a few weeks. That's. If you really need the halacha immediately after Shira, we'll look it in. But let's take a look. Turn to 110 in the Yalkut Yosef. Dipping food into a cooked beverage. All the Maram Rishon Tzion Ben Ish Chai rule lenient if one holds the dry end of a food. Halacha Brura rule one must be for eating in this manner. Halacha Brura is more machmer in this. He says if you're putting a dry food, we're still concerned and you have to do Netilat Yadayim. This is also the halacha of Orla Tzion. But nevertheless, in practice, you may rely on the leniency of the Ben Ish Chai and Halichot Olam of Chacham Ovadia. So Chacham Ovadia and the Ben Ish Chai held that when you're dipping a dry food into a liquid, you do not have to wash. So when you said that there's a rabbi who said you have to wash, perhaps he's going with the Halacha Brura and the Orla Tzion. One second. Even so, the halacha Brura found leans different. Okay, look on that same page 110. Look 2 paragraphs up. There's a basic difference between the 2 cases. When dipping cookie into a coffee and eating it, the coffee that has been absorbed into a cookie has become part of it and is no longer considered a beverage. Another reason why it's okay to dip into a beverage. The cookie takes the liquid and becomes part of the cookie. The liquid becomes part of the cookie. When you put a celery stick, the liquid doesn't go into the celery stick. It stays on the celery stick. So he says that's a difference. And therefore you can be mekel. You can be mekel because of that. That's another reason to be mekel. Which one am I looking at? I don't know which one you're looking at. You have to find me the one.
From here, somewhere here. I don't know.
Right, this one we did. When you find it, show it to me because I have other things to go through. Find me which one he said. Who talks about the cookie, and I'll read it. I don't see it there. All right. So Lamaisa, we came out a couple of leniencies here. Another leniency that we brought was the mizonot absorbs the liquid and becomes part of the mizonot. It's no more liquid on it, and therefore it's okay. If you usually put a dry thing and usually it's not all wet, also seems to be okay. And it's usually eaten with a fork or a spoon, also seems to be okay. So there are kulot, there are leniencies to this case. And again, a lot of these leniencies are based on the fact that Tosafot holds you don't have to do it at all. That's why there are all these kulot. Okay. Yes, Malkiel.
Eggs that were boiled and taken out and they're wet and I'm peeling it off. It's okay to eat it after, or do I have to wash?
Say again, I can't hear you.
Eggs that were boiled in water.
Eggs that were boiled.
Boiled eggs,
Okay.
yes. And then I'm taking it out to peel it off to eat it. Do I
Yeah.
have to wash before I peel the wet egg?
No,
That's most.
you're not eating the wet the wet shell.
But I'm touching it with my hands. I'm gonna
Yeah,
have some
but you're
wetness
not
in my fingers.
right. But that's the shell. That's not the food. It's like a wrapper. The wrapper. You had the celery
So
in the
it's
wrapper.
okay,
The
right?
wrapper got wet. You don't have to wash it.
Even though my
Same thing
wet
with the.
fingers might touch the egg itself when I start eating it.
So now, if the egg is
There's
wet,
possibility.
if the egg
Yeah,
is
I'm
wet
gonna
now,
touch the outer shell. I'm
Yeah.
gonna peel it off, and then with that wet
so
finger, I
usually
will
on
touch the
Shabbat,
egg itself.
usually on Shabbat, they get Chumash Shabbat, right? You take it out, it's wet, but the shell it already dries up in a few seconds. It's so hot, the water
Well, not
becomes
Shabbat,
that.
regular day per se. You know,
Even a
regular day
regular
per
day,
se.
it's really that wet that when you take it off, your hands still get wet. The eggs, anything that gets
It's
wet. So if the
possible.
egg
If
is
it cools off, it's possible. You just take it out and
okay, so since it's a possibility, but it's not a regular, it's not a regular thing, right? We're not going to say that eggs usually get wet when they hard boil them, so then you don't have to wash your hands. But if it's regular by you that they're usually wet and you're eating them, then you should wash your hands. Depends how your eggs are made, I assume. Most hard eggs that I've eaten, usually you just peel the shell, and then by the time you get to the egg, it's
Still, anyways, your hands wet. Anyways,
it stays wet. I don't know. I can't remember my hands being wet. I'll pay more attention to it. I'll pay more attention. Okay. All right. Let's take a look. Let's see if we get a little bit more done in the next 15 minutes. Okay, we're on page 192. Mishnah Berurah says, when we call Malcolm, the pachot mekazai nearly pashat she'en la'achmer b'zeh klal, the filu b'pat harba achronim mekelin. He says, if you're eating less than a kazayit, kazayit, how many grams? 27 grams. So if you're eating less than 27 grams, you like on karpas, right? We cut it less than a kazayit, and you're going to dip that into a liquid. You don't have to wash your hands because the whole din for washing, even for bread, you might not have to wash if you're eating less than a kazayit. So if you're here by vegetables or whatever it is, and it's less than a kazayit, you don't have to wash your hands. So it's another kula. If you have less than a bread, less than a kazayit of the food, and you're dipping it, you don't have to wash. Then the Piskei Teshuvot says the Mishnah Berurah reversed later on. However, the Piskei Teshuvot says, don't worry about his reversal. It's not necessary to wash when dipping less than a kazayit. We can take the lenient approach. Take a look at page 107 in the Yalkut Yosef, halacha 38. He says technically one is obligated to perform the Yadayim only if one plans to eat at least a kazayit of moistened food. If someone intends to eat less than a kazayit, he's not obligated to wash his hands. Anyone who has Yirat Shemayim will wash his hands and get a brach. Right. Okay. So you do not have to wash your hands if you eat less than a kazayit. That's the ikar hadith. Okay. So it's less than 27 grams. You will not have to wash your hands, even if you're dipping into a liquid. Other considerations, and here comes a lot of the kulot from the Yalkut Yosef. So this is Chamuvaja, this is Rabbi Tzach Yosef. A lot of the kulot now, all these leniencies are most of them are from the Yalkut Yosef. Let's take a look. He says as follows: whether a boiled drink has the status of a liquid, a boiled drink, does it have a status of a liquid? Okay, boiled water or something like that. So he brings the Maharamat concluded because it's not considered liquid. And this is what the teacher, the Maharash Sagis, taught, that a liquid that's half cooked and the food was mixed in it, the status liquid is not nullified, and it's considered to be a food. The majority of rabbis and almost all of them permitted food dipped into a boiled liquid without washing hands.
Does it consider a liquid? Boiled thing?
That's what he's saying.
Boiled soup, whatever.
There's an opinion that says that anything that's boiled is no longer considered a liquid.
even if it cools off the water.
Say again?
Even if the water cools off.
Yeah, once it's cooked. Once it's cooked,
Once it's cooked.
boil liquid.
Mebushal.
Yeah, once it's mebushal, right? So comes the Yaakov Yosef and says, based on this, that's what he says, ha'oichel uga, o biscuit, pachot mekazayit, eating less than a kazayit, right? Umitavila l'toich kais te o koifacham, and you're eating, and you're putting it into hot coffee or tea. And feeling yadav nagayz b'mashke, ain't tzarich little yadav, mishum davar shetibu mashke, kivin shem mitabo, the davar mibusha, the gam hu pachot mekazayit. So he says you have to have two leniencies. According to the Yaakov Yosef, as long as you have two leniencies, you don't have to wash your hands. So if you're having a kazayit, less than a kazayit, right, and it's boiled, there's no din of mashke, no din of tibul b'mashke.
You have to know both of them.
Ava oichel shir kazayit uga, u'mitavatoch kais te'o kafa acham, im yodav no ga od bertivot. If his hands touches the moisture, it's tzarich litav as yadav. Then he has to wash his hands. If his hands touch, vim eina no ga is bertivot, ain't tzarich litav yadav. But if it doesn't touch, he doesn't have to. Okay. So even if you're eating more than a kazayit and you're dipping it inside, right? You do not have to wash your hands if you're not going to touch the liquid. Because remember, we had that kula that it says if you are using a spoon at that time, because you're never going to touch it. So it comes out, you don't have to wash your hands when you're dipping a biscuit into a tea or a coffee. You don't have to. And if the water was not boiled,
Oh, you have to.
and he's going to touch it, even if he's eating less, they don't have to wash his hands if it's not boiled. And he's eating, even if he's eating less than a kazai, because you only have one leniency here, less than a kazai. You don't have two leniencies. It's not boiled. So therefore, you'll have to wash your hands. And if he's careful not to touch the liquid, and he's eating less than a kazai, he still will be allowed not to wash. If he's being careful not to touch the liquid with a biscuit, because it's as if he's holding it with a spoon. When it comes to mizonot, when it comes to dry food, we have the shita that it's as if you're holding it with a spoon, as long as you're making sure not to touch it. So even if it's not cooked, if it's less than a kazai and you're making sure not to touch it, you don't have to wash. As long as you have two leniencies, two kulot, you can be mitzvah of the kulot, you can combine the kulot and don't wash. So in most cases, you're drinking a hot tea, right? And you want to dip in your tea biscuit. Since you're making sure not to make your hand touch the liquid because it's hot, it's already not going to touch it. And it's boiled, two leniencies, you don't have to wash your hands. Even more than a kazai. Okay? This is straight up Yalkut Yosef. Halacha 8 and 9. One who eats bread that was placed into hot soup or the like. One need not wash his hands because of davar shetibu b'mashka, since he's eating it with a spoon and it's also cooked. If you want to be strict and wash it, okay, use into heights. So according to the Yalkut Yosef, if you have two leniencies, you're good to go. He brings here from Rosh Zalman Orbach, before Rosh Zalman Orbach, Rabbi Eliezer Melamed, his Bnei Halacha says, as long as you have one leniency, he says for Ashkenazim who hold like the Mishnah Brura and the Ramah says you have to wash. As long as you have one leniency, you don't have to wash. So most times it's either boiled or you're eating mastic azayit or you're making sure not to touch it or whatever it is, one leniency and you're out. You don't have to do it. Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Orbach, he says, "Yesh lahakab netila zol davar shetibu l'mashka kishaychol ketefel l'machal achar she'ein tibu l'mashka." It's if you're eating it as a secondary food. He says, such as eating a kugel with a cucumber, where one does not recite a bracha on the cucumber because it's secondary. So if you're eating like a tefel, you don't have to wash your hands. Like the main thing you're eating is a kugel, and next to the kugel is a wet cucumber. So Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Orbach, you don't have to wash your hands there because the main food is the kugel and not the cucumber, even though you're eating the cucumber. That's another kula. Even if you're not eating it with this one or more. Let's take a look in the Yalkut Yosef English edition, page 109. This is where he reviews the kulot, and he says as follows. Based on the above halachot, there are three bases for leniency. If one eats without touching the moistened portion, because if you eat, making sure not to touch it, then it's as if you are holding it with a fork or something. And even though so we already talked about it. If one plans to eat less than the kazayit of the food, that's number two. If the beverage has been cooked, we do not rely on any one of these leniencies, but in case where the two of them are combined, you do not have to perform the Netilat Yadayim. So here he gives the same examples. If the beverage has been cooked and someone moistens the food in it and then eats the food without touching the moistened portion at all, it is not necessary to perform the Netilat Yadayim. For example, if someone dips a piece of cake into coffee or tea and takes care not to touch the moistened part, he does not have to perform a Netilat Yadayim, even if he eats more than a kazayit of food. That's case A. Look in case B on page 110. If someone plans to eat less than a kazayit and he wishes to dip it into a cooked beverage, he does not have to perform a Netilat Yadayim because it's less than a kazayit and it's cooked. C. If someone wishes to eat less than a kazayit of food dipped in the beverage without touching the moistened portion of the food at all, so it's less than a kazayit and he's not touching it. So even if the beverage is cold or it's not cooked, it's still okay. So those are your three leniencies. The food that you're not going to touch the portion, right? You're not going to touch the wet portion. B, it's cooked. And C, it's less than a kazayit. Any of those three mixtures, and you are fine not to wash your hands for Netilat Yadayim for davar shetibulu b'mashke. Yes, Malkia.
What if it's a mixture like baby formula bottle? There is some formula, some cold water, and some hot water mixture,
Right.
and I want to touch to see if it's not too hot.
So you're touching a mixture, but is it a food? It's a beverage. It's a drink. The
It's a
formula is a
beverage,
drink.
yeah.
Okay,
It's
so we
okay,
already
right?
learned that.
So you know, formula is the solid formula.
Right. It's only when it's on a solid. If it's a beverage, we don't have to wash our hands, even if you're touching the beverage with your fingers.
Okay.
It's only when it's a food. That was a Mishnah Berurah. Yaqid Yosef also said that for beverages we don't wash, only for solid food.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sandwich with no matzah. Not on Pesach.
You want to make a sandwich with matzah?
Take the matzah, you run out the door and make it soft.
Uh-huh.
Leave it for a few minutes.
Uh-huh.
Then make a sandwich.
And you're eating it when it's wet.
Well,
It's wet enough. It's wet enough that if you touch it, does it touch something else you can make it wet? Then you have to wash your hands without a bracha.
Okay, safe side, wash all the time. No problem. That's it. No big deal.
Okay. So that he said he's making a sandwich. And we also said he's making a sandwich out of matzah, not during Pesach, and he's wetting the matzah first with water, and then he puts his stuff inside. He closes it, and now he wants to eat his matzah, but he's touching it. It's wet enough to make his hands wet to make something else wet. So that's the case. You'll have to wash your hands and Netilat Yadayim without a bracha because the solid is wet. It's mizanot for us during the year. Okay. What did I put there? All right, Rabotai, we're gonna stop the share here now. I got to go at this point, but this ends off the whole topic in this section about the davar shetibil b'mashke, something that we put into a liquid. This ends that topic. So this is the halachot that comes out of it. We'll end up over here for this week. I have a question for the Olam. What do we want to do the next 2 weeks? Because you have the 2 more Sundays till Purim, right? We have 2 Sundays to Purim. So what do we want to do? Last year we did Purim halachot. Do you want to do 1 more week of Netilat Yadayim, and then the week before Purim to review Purim halachot, or you want to just continue straight into Netilat Yadayim? What do you want to do?
I think we should do next week Purim and then
1 second,
continue
Avram,
with
what'd you say?
next week Purim halachot and then continue with the Netilat Yadayim and the rest.
So 1 week for Purim halachot, okay?
Just to
1 week
refresh
for
your
Purim halachot?
memory.
1 week is enough.
Okay. So the day before, the day before Purim, because Monday night's Purim, or Tuesday night's Purim. Okay, so next week Netilat Yadayim, and the week after that, right before Purim, we'll talk halachot Purim. Malkiel, you're good with that?
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah, good. Okay, so next week we'll continue Netilat Yadayim, and the Sunday before Purim we'll do a Kitzur Halachot on Purim. Okay, and then we'll take it from there. We'll see how we'll do it for Pesach. Okay, thank you everybody. Shavua Tov.
Thank you so much.